All right, hello everybody. Today I will be talking about cataloging narrative games to expand the bibliographic universe. So hopefully you all are here for my mystical sounding title. So libraries have been actively collecting games for a long time, but primarily games released on some sort of physical media, like CD-ROMs, cartridges, so on and so forth. And as a result, very few narrative games, especially narrative games released in the last 20 years or so, are represented in these collections. So I talked about this at my NarraScope talk last year, so I'll just briefly sort of summarize the main point. But really the reason why is that most of these games are released in digital-only formats and through platforms and venues that libraries are unaccustomed to collecting from. So platforms like itch and of course IFComp and through creators' own websites and things like that. The other sort of interrelated issue is that libraries have increasingly talked about how to collect and catalog games, but a lot of the discourse that's happened has been around mainstream titles released for consoles and released by major publishers. And as we know, narrative games are created in different ways through different production methods. They're released in different ways. They're cover a different subject matter. So they're sort of characteristically very different than mainstream video games that make up most of library game collections. So my dream is that libraries can become a place for both people that are new to narrative games as well as people that are familiar with narrative games to find, discover, play, talk about, learn how to make narrative games. So there's sort of, this is overly simplified of course, but a few sort of key points that need to be covered. So libraries need to collect narrative games, so they need to have them in their collections. Libraries need to catalog narrative games so that people can find them out of the hundreds of thousands or millions of items in the library's collection. And then people need to be able to discover and actually play those games. So today I'll really only be touching briefly on this cataloging component. And then at the end of my talk, I'm going to talk more about the aspect of issues with collecting narrative games, because that's a research area that I'm moving into next. So the question today is really, how do we best represent narrative games in library catalogs? Or to put it in more sort of laudatory terms, how can we integrate narrative games into the bibliographic universe? So I am an admittedly huge acolyte of library catalogs. I teach a class on cataloging. I am a fanboy for catalogs. So I think that library catalogs are the coolest thing. And the reason why is because they don't just say, what the title of the thing is or say that we have this in our collection, but they are a model of the bibliographic universe. So I won't go through all of this, but this is sort of an international, a model of the bibliographic universe developed through an international standardization process through an international library organization. And really, when we're cataloging a game, we're not just thinking about, here's this thing, it's on the shelf. We're thinking about, how does this work exist in a broader context, a broader universe of other bibliographic materials. So if we take something like Zork, and because Zork was a commercial game released on physical media, it is actually represented in a number of library collections, including the University of Michigan, which I have the record for pulled up here. We can see that, yes, Michigan has this item, but we can also see how this item connects to other subject matter and how the work was created, who designed it, who published it. We can really see how this individual work is situated in this larger bibliographic universe. And the sort of bigger point that I want to make is that, why is this important? By cataloging narrative games, we're really saying these works are part of the bibliographic universe. And the creators of these works as well are part of the bibliographic universe. And I think it's the mission of libraries to organize the world's knowledge and to integrate the thing that I'm really passionate about, narrative games, into this bigger picture. So from this bigger picture, I'll talk about the small steps that we did, which is, since no one is really cataloging these games, these digitally distributed narrative games, we started by just sort of taking a small sample of narrative games and creating catalog records for them, and seeing sort of what came up and how to best approach it. So we selected 18 choice of games titles, and I selected choice of games because it's a publisher that I really like, and they also release games through Steam and a number of other channels, and they have lots of really great, rich bibliographic metadata with their games. So they list who created it, who the playtesters were, all that sort of stuff that could feed really well into catalog records. And we also created or enhanced, some creators already have these records, but we created or enhanced 36 Library of Congress name authority records. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but basically a name authority record is a record maintained by the Library of Congress that says this person is a stakeholder, a player in the bibliographic universe. They have played some part in creating a bibliographic work collected by libraries. So this is an example of one of the catalog records that we made for the game Brent Device, written by Natalia Theodorodou, published by Choice of Games in 2018. And I'll just cover some a few key points, decision points that we made, things that we also sort of found as we were cataloging these games. So for one thing, narrative games often have sort of identifiable individual creators in a way that's unlike major video games from mainstream publishers. So we can identify, the writer, as well as in the case of like these sorts of games titles, people that were editors, copy editors, playtesters, so on and so forth. So we're able to really represent, who made this thing and integrate that into the catalog record. Subject terms that are usually applied for works of literature. So the Library of Congress also maintains a vocabulary of subject terms to describe literary works. And these actually applied really well to these narrative games because the story is the main focus. So we're able to take this work, which is sort of a neo-noir cyberpunk story, and use these existing subject terms like cyberpunk and mystery fiction to describe this work. However, one thing that we really found out is that while we have these terms to describe what these games are about, we're really lacking good terms in the existing standard vocabularies to describe these things as narrative games. So the existing Library of Congress term for these works is plot your own stories, which is sort of lacking in a number of ways. It sort of overly ties this to sort of a choose your adventure lineage and doesn't really talk about really the ways that these are interactive games. So we added some of our own non-standardized vocabulary like text-based games, interactive narrative games, but those are only used by our library, not by libraries outside of us. So what does it look like then for these works to be part of the bibliographic universe? What does those mean? So for instance, if someone does a subject search term for cyberpunk, they want to see all the cyberpunk works in the library's collection, now they'll get results that have works like Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson and this Choice of Games title, Brent Device. So we're seeing that these connections are being made between this narrative game, which is a cyberpunk story, and other cyberpunk literature in the library's collection. So I made the point too about how it's important to recognize and uphold the creators of these works as part of the bibliographic universe as well. And so for a work like Brent Device, Natalia Theodorodou already had a name authority record because they are the author of other print literature, but we added details about their work as a game designer as well. So we integrated that as part of their record in the Library of Congress. And we also created name authority records that that weren't existent before, including, for instance, a name authority record for Dan Fabulich to recognize the work that he's done developing the programming language used to make these games. So, like I said, we're focusing on, in this talk, on how we catalog these games to represent them, what they're about, how they're made. But that's only one piece of this puzzle, right? So how do we now get people to play these games that will then encourage libraries to collect more games and continue the cycle? So in a lot of ways, these games are like ebooks, right? I mean, they're digital files written by somebody that you should be able to, access directly on your computer, like you would an ebook. However, for digital games, there's not a great way to do this. So we have to deliver this game that we've acquired through Steam on a dedicated computer in the library's computer lab because Steam does not have licensing models friendly to libraries. And really no other platform does, right? So we have established vendors for ebooks like EBSCO and ProQuest, and they're slightly evil, right? But they do make it possible for libraries to collect ebooks and deliver them directly to people's personal computers. So there's no real solution like that for even mainstream games, but for indie games either. So that leads me to the next steps. How do we collect more narrative games? And I'd like to invite you all to help me with that. So I am starting a new research project where I'm interviewing librarians and game creators to develop strategies to collect digital games. And this will start with some virtual discussion sessions open to all game creators of any kind and experience level. So we'll be holding these next month in July. So you can find more details about how to participate in those sessions by following this QR code, which goes to an InFiction forum thread. So that'll be sort of the home for information about this. Or you can just email me at ccpost@uncg.edu. So that is all for me, and thank you.